When someone you deeply care about is hurting, what is your very first instinct? If you're anything like me, you probably want to jump right in and fix it. You want to offer solutions, give some solid advice, and somehow, just engineer a way out of their suffering. But what happens when the pain is chronic? What happens when the situation, like long-term caregiving, for example, simply cannot be fixed? How do you actually help someone then?
Welcome to this explainer. Okay, let's dive into this. Today, we are exploring a profoundly different approach to helping others, drawn directly from the Christian Caare Mentor Self-Study Guide. This whole thing is really about transforming that overwhelming urge we all have to be a fixer into the quiet, incredibly powerful art of companioning. We're going to see how stepping back from giving advice and choosing instead to simply walk alongside someone can honestly be the most life-changing support you can possibly offer.
Now, this entire framework comes to us from the Caregivers community, which is a ministry entirely dedicated to caring for caregivers. And the beating heart of their philosophy is compassionate peer care. This program isn't built on clinical expertise or, professional counseling degrees. It is entirely grounded in shared lived experience. It's about unpaid caregivers who have walked that hard road, turning around to offer spiritual and emotional support to someone currently on that exact same path.
So here is our roadmap for today's explainer. First, the call to walk alongside. Second, prayer as shared presence. Third, the mentor's 3 pillars. Fourth, the no advice principle. And finally, listening with the heart. We actually have a lot of really practical communication tools to cover, so let's just get right to it.
All right, Section 1, the call to walk alongside. Stewardship of lived experience. In this framework, mentorship is completely redefined. It's not about achieving this elevated status of having all the answers. Rather, it is the wise stewardship of your own personal caregiving journey. It's recognizing that God can actually use your lived experience, even the really painful parts, as a channel of grace for someone else. Let me share a story from the guide about a mentor named Thomas. When Thomas first agreed to mentor, he really doubted himself. He had cared for his wife through declining health, and he was worried that his own lingering sadness somehow disqualified him. His very first call was with Mike, a man caring for his sister after a stroke. Early on in the call, Mike actually apologized for talking too much, and Thomas simply replied, "You don't have to apologize. This is your space." That gentle permission, it literally changed everything. Mike opened up about his immense guilt and his deep, deep exhaustion. Thomas didn't offer a 10-step plan, he just shared a tiny piece of his own story to show Mike he wasn't alone. And Mike later said, "I thought I was weak. Now I realize I'm still walking." And that matters. Thomas's simple accompaniment transformed Mike's exhaustion into genuine relief.
Moving on to Section 2. Prayer as shared presence. With, not over.
When you're sitting with someone in deep pain, prayer can suddenly feel really intimidating. We so often treat it as a performance, or like a magical tool to force a solution. And this brings us to James and Daniel. James was a mentor who really wanted to be faithful. During his first conversation with Daniel, whose wife had a chronic illness, James offered this massive, incredibly long prayer. He filled it with scripture, asking God for healing and strength and peace. But when he finished, Daniel just nodded politely. A vast distance had been created between them. James realized later, actually thinking of Matthew 6:7 about not babbling like pagans with many words, that he had been praying over Daniel, not with him. So the next time, James asked gently if Daniel wanted a short prayer. Daniel agreed. James prayed a surprisingly simple prayer. "Lord, you see the heaviness we share." Daniel looked up and said, "That felt very special." The profound connection happened when prayer became a sensitive, shared space. To help with this, the guide recommends the ACTS prayer model: adoration, confession, thanksgiving, and supplication. It gives mentors a beautifully structured, simple way to invite God's presence without completely overwhelming the caregiver. You start by honoring God's unchanging character. Acknowledge our faults, give thanks, even in the hard circumstances, and then, only then, bring your simple requests to Him. It keeps prayer firmly anchored in a relationship rather than just running down a list of demands.
That brings us to Section 3, the mentor's 3 pillars, a shift in identity. Adopting the right identity is absolutely crucial here, because if you don't know who you are in the relationship, you will inevitably fall into the trap of trying to be the hero or the problem solver. The guide outlines 3 firm pillars for a mentor's identity. First, the witness. You model hope by acknowledging hardship honestly and showing that weakness isn't a failure. It's often where grace is actually most visible. Second, the listener. This is a pure act of humility. By just listening, you directly counter the caregiver's feeling of being completely invisible. And third, the burden bearer. Now, you don't take the burden away, because realistically you just can't. Instead, you stand alongside them so the weight doesn't completely crush them. These pillars beautifully anchor the mentor's true purpose in support, not control.
All right, Section 4, the No Advice Principle, resisting the urge to fix.
This brings us to what is arguably the most counterintuitive part of this entire approach. I really want to read this powerful quote aloud. It's adapted from Miles Downey and found in the guide. The primary function of the mentor is to understand, not to solve, heal, make better, or be wise. Think deeply about that for a second. When we hand out advice, we actually risk silencing the caregiver's own voice and completely ignoring their unique reality. The real magic happens when the mentor seeks to understand, which then allows the caregiver to understand themselves better and confidently make their own decisions. We see this clearly with Margaret and Leela. Leela was just utterly exhausted caring for her husband with dementia, and she desperately asked Margaret, "Do you think I should just stop trying so hard?" Margaret immediately felt that burning urge to give advice, to tell her to push through because, hey, she had been there herself. But Margaret paused. Instead of steering, she stayed present. She shared that when she felt that deeply tired, she had to ask God what faithfulness looked like in that specific season. Leela started to cry from pure relief, saying, "I thought feeling tired meant I was failing." Margaret's choice to withhold her advice allowed Leela to find true comfort and clarity on her own terms.
So, you might be asking, if you aren't giving advice, what exactly are you doing? Well, the guide lists 5 core skills: support, learn, share, inform, and dream. You support by providing a steadfast safety net of listening. You learn by being genuinely curious about their specific daily situation. You share your own story to accompany, not to compare or one-up them. You inform by gently pointing to helpful resources without becoming the ultimate expert. And you dream by helping them look beyond the immediate present crisis. These proactive steps completely replace the need to hand out unsolicited advice. Let's actually look at this in practice. Compare an ineffective, advice-heavy response like, "You should keep her home. I did, and it was a blessing," with a skillful mentor response. What are the most important factors you need to consider? Do you see the difference there? That second option entirely empowers the caregiver to think through their own reality. It respects their dignity, honors their specific challenges, and reinforces their absolute right to self-determination.
And that leads us to our final section, Section 5, Listening with the Heart, the Ministry of Communication.
Here, we reframe communication from just exchanging facts into a sacred, prayerful choice to be fully present. Consider Ruth. She was a former teacher who was very used to filling silence and explaining things to people. Her caregiver, Elena, spoke kind of haltingly about her frustrating father. Ruth fought her natural urge to jump in and fix the uncomfortable moment. She actively chose silence. Finally, Elena admitted that what hurt most was that no one ever asked how she was doing. Ruth simply reflected her feelings, saying, "It sounds like you're carrying this alone, and that's exhausting." Elena just exhaled. See, effective communication isn't about saying the perfect thing. It is about creating the necessary, quiet space for the truth to naturally surface.
A massive part of this is the types of questions we ask. A closed question like, "Did you sleep well last night?" Well, it limits the conversation to a dead-end yes or no. It totally stops the flow. But an open question like, "What has been most challenging for you this week?" actively invites deep reflection. It honors the caregiver by giving them the floor to explore their own deep waters and articulate exactly what they are going through. Ultimately, the crucial point comes down to the 70-30 rule. As a mentor walking alongside someone, you should be actively listening at least 70% of the time and speaking no more than 30% of the time. Just bite your tongue. Let the silence do the heavy lifting for you. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the sacredness of shared prayer to the tough discipline of biting our tongues when we really want to offer a quick fix. So I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to take away from this explainer. What if your presence is vastly more powerful than your advice? What if the absolute greatest gift you can offer someone who is hurting isn't a brilliant solution, but the quiet, steadfast promise that they do not have to walk through the dark alone? Thank you so much for exploring this with me, and I sincerely hope it empowers you to simply be there for the people in your life.